My name is Ava Richardson, and I'm 65 years old. If you had asked me a month ago what I thought my life would look like at this age, I would have painted you a picture of quiet dignity, surrounded by loving family, enjoying the golden years that Robert and I had worked so hard to secure. I was wrong about everything. If you want to hear more stories like this, subscribe to the channel and tell me which city you are watching us from. Now, let's continue with the story. It was my birthday, September 15th, and I was sitting in my daughter Jessica's pristine living room in Mount Pleasant, just outside Charleston. The house was one of those modern suburban homes with white columns and perfectly manicured azaleas, the kind that screams successful middle-class family to anyone driving by. Jessica had insisted on hosting my birthday dinner, and I had foolishly believed it came from a place of love. "Mom, you really didn't need to bring anything?" Jessica said, as I handed her the homemade peach cobbler I'd spent all morning preparing. She barely glanced at it before setting it aside, like it was something from a discount grocery store instead of a recipe that had been in our family for 3 generations. The house smelled like takeout Chinese food, which should have been my first clue. Jessica used to love cooking together when she was younger. We'd spend Sunday afternoons in my kitchen, flour in our hair, laughing as we tried new recipes. But that was before she married Brad, before she discovered that expressing love through effort was apparently beneath her new station in life. Brad was already seated at the dining table. His expensive suit jacket hung carefully on the back of his chair, scrolling through his iPhone even during what was supposed to be a family celebration. He worked as a senior manager at TechFlow Innovations, one of Atlanta's rising tech companies, and he never let anyone forget it. At 42, he carried himself with the kind of artificial confidence that comes from a good salary and a company car. "Happy birthday, Ava," he said without looking up, his tone suggesting he was doing me an enormous favor by acknowledging my existence. My granddaughter Emma, barely 16 and already showing signs of her mother's calculating nature, was texting furiously at the other end of the table. She glanced up long enough to mumble, "Happy birthday, Grandma," before returning to her phone. Gone was the sweet girl who used to run to me for hugs, who would spend entire afternoons listening to my stories about her grandfather, Robert. The dinner itself was awkward and tense. Jessica complained about the cost of everything: the Chinese food, the birthday cake from the expensive bakery downtown, even the bottle of wine Brad had opened. Every few minutes, she'd make some comment about how tight things were, how Brad's company was restructuring, how they really couldn't afford extras but had made an exception for my birthday. "Honestly, Mom," she said, picking at her sweet and sour chicken, "I don't know how you managed when Dad was alive. Everything is so expensive now. Healthcare, groceries, utilities. Sometimes I wonder how seniors like you survive on fixed incomes." The comment stung because I knew it was loaded. Jessica had been hinting for months that I might need help managing my finances, that perhaps it was time to consider moving into a smaller place, maybe even assisted living. She painted these suggestions as concern for my well-being, but I could see the calculation in her eyes every time she looked around my house in downtown Charleston. Robert had left me our beautiful Victorian home on Trad Street, one of the most desirable addresses in the historic district. The house had been in his family for 3 generations, and he'd spent years lovingly restoring it. Jessica knew it was worth at least $2.5 million, maybe more in today's market. She also knew that maintaining a house that size required money she assumed I didn't have. The birthday cake was store-bought and obviously cheap, with frosting that tasted like sugar and artificial vanilla. As Jessica lit the candles, she made another comment that cut deeper than she probably intended. 65 candles would be a fire hazard, she laughed, lighting only 5. "Besides, at your age, Mom, we should probably be grateful for each year we get." I blew out the candles and made my wish that my daughter would remember what love actually looked like. After dinner, as I was helping clear the table, despite being the guest of honor, I overheard Jessica talking to Brad in the kitchen. They thought I couldn't hear them, but at 65, there's nothing wrong with my hearing. "God, this was expensive," Jessica was saying, looking at the receipt from the restaurant. "Between this and the cake and everything else, We spent almost $200. I could have gotten her something from the grocery store deli. It's one day a year. Jess, Brad replied, though his tone suggested he agreed with her. One day a year that we can't afford, she shot back. Honestly, sometimes I think. She paused, then whispered something I couldn't quite catch. That's horrible. Even for you, Brad said, but he was chuckling. I moved closer to the kitchen door, my heart pounding. I'm just saying, Jessica continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I hope this is your last birthday, Mom. Ah, you've lived long enough. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there, frozen, holding a stack of plates, feeling like the ground had opened beneath my feet. My own daughter, the child I had carried for 9 months, raised with love and sacrifice, whom I had supported through college, through her wedding, through every crisis in her adult life, was wishing for my death. The worst part came when they realized I had heard them. Instead of shame, instead of apologies, Jessica looked me straight in the eye and doubled down. Mom, you need to accept the reality of aging. You're becoming a financial burden. And frankly, it's not fair to expect Brad and me to keep subsidizing your lifestyle. I don't remember what I said, if I said anything at all. I just know that I left without my purse, without my coat, without even saying goodbye to Emma. I drove home through the dark Charleston streets, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, my daughter's words echoing in my mind. That night, I sat alone in the house that Robert had loved so much, surrounded by the memories of a lifetime, and realized that the people I thought would mourn my passing were actually counting the days until it happened. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear Jessica's voice. I hope this is your last birthday. Mom, the cruelty of it kept washing over me in waves, each time feeling fresh and devastating. I wandered through the house like a ghost, touching the furniture Robert had carefully selected, running my fingers along the crown, molding he'd spent months restoring. By morning, I had made a decision that would change everything. I was going to clean out Robert's study, something I'd been putting off for 5 years since his death. It wasn't sentiment that had kept me from touching his things. It was the overwhelming nature of a lifetime's worth of paperwork, files, and memories all mixed together in that room. Robert had been methodical about everything except organization. His mahogany desk was cluttered with papers dating back decades, and his filing cabinet looked like it had been organized by someone throwing darts at a board. But there was one thing he had always been crystal clear about. There was an envelope in his safe that I was only to open when the time was right. How will I know when the time is right? I had asked him during one of our conversations about death, conversations that became more frequent after his first heart attack. Oh, sweetheart, he had said, squeezing my hand. You'll know. Trust me, when that moment comes, you'll know exactly what to do. Sitting in his leather chair that morning, still wearing the dress I'd worn to my birthday dinner, I knew the time had come. The safe was hidden behind a reproduction of a Civil War painting, something Robert had thought was terribly clever. The combination was our wedding date, or 6/15/82. Inside, along with our important documents and my grandmother's jewelry, was a thick manila envelope with "Forever, when you need your strength," written in Robert's careful handwriting. My hands were trembling as I opened it. The first thing I saw was a letter in Robert's handwriting, dated just 3 months before his death. "My dearest Ava," it began. "If you're reading this, then something has happened that has made you question everything about your life and the people in it. I'm sorry, my love. I hoped this day would never come, but I've always been a realist. The money changes people, and I've spent our entire marriage protecting you from that truth. Money? What money? We lived comfortably, but we weren't wealthy. Robert had been a successful businessman, but he'd always been modest about our finances. We drove sensible cars, took reasonable vacations, lived well but not extravagantly." I kept reading. "The truth is, darling, we are far wealthier than I ever let you know. I kept this from you not out of disrespect, but out of love. I wanted you to know people's true hearts, to be loved for who you are, not what you have. But now, when you need strength, when you need power, when you need to protect yourself, this is your armor. The rest of the letter was a detailed explanation of assets I never knew existed. Real estate investments across Georgia and South Carolina. A portfolio of stocks and bonds managed by a firm in Atlanta. A trust fund that had been growing quietly for decades. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. The TechFlow Innovations stock, the letter continued. I've been buying shares quietly for 15 years. As of my last purchase, we own 40% of the company. I chose not to take a board position because I preferred to remain a silent partner. But legally, you are now one of the primary shareholders of the company where your son-in-law works. I had to read that paragraph 3 times before it sank in. Brad's precious tech company, the source of all his arrogance and self-importance. The job that made him feel superior to everyone around him. I owned nearly half of it. The envelope contained more than just the letter. There were bank statements showing accounts with balances that made my head spin. A private investment fund worth $650,000. Certificates of deposit that had been earning compound interest for decades. Real estate deeds for properties in Savannah, Atlanta, and even a small beach house on Kiowa Island that I didn't even know Robert had purchased. But perhaps most importantly, there was contact information for Mr. David Thompson, Robert's attorney and financial advisor, a man I'd met socially a few times, but never in a professional capacity. David knows everything, Robert's letter explained. He's been managing our affairs discreetly for years. He's also one of the most ethical men I've ever known, and he'll help you navigate whatever situation has brought you to this envelope. Trust him completely. I called Mr. Thompson immediately, not caring that it was barely 8 in the morning. Mrs. Richardson, he said, and I could hear the warmth in his voice even over the phone. I've been wondering when you might call. Robert told me this day might come, though I hoped it never would. David, I need to understand what's happening. This letter, these documents, I don't even know where to begin. Why don't I come to you? Are you free this afternoon? We have a lot to discuss, and I think it's better done in person. David Thompson arrived at my house at 2 o'clock sharp, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the kind of understated but expensive suit that whispered rather than shouted about success. He was probably in his early 60s, with silver hair and the bearing of someone who had spent decades keeping other people's secrets. Before we begin, he said, settling into Robert's favorite armchair in the living room, I want you to know that your husband was one of the most thoughtful men I've ever worked with. Everything he did was designed to protect you and preserve your dignity. Over the next 3 hours, David walked me through the full scope of Robert's financial planning. It was breathtaking in its complexity and foresight. Robert hadn't just been successful. He had been brilliant. He'd invested early in tech companies, bought real estate before Charleston became a major tourist destination, and diversified our portfolio in ways that had protected us through every economic downturn of the past 3 decades. Your net worth, David said matter-of-factly, is approximately $4.2 million, not including your primary residence. The TechFlow shares alone are worth about $1.8 million at current market value. I felt dizzy. Why didn't he tell me? Because he loved you, David replied simply. Robert watched what money did to his own family when he was growing up. His father was wealthy, and Robert saw how it attracted the wrong kind of people, how it made it impossible to know who genuinely cared about him. He wanted your relationships to be authentic. Even with Jessica, David's expression grew sad, especially with Jessica. Robert hoped she would mature, that she would learn to value you for who you are, rather than what you might leave her. But he was also pragmatic. That's why he made sure you would have options if that hope proved unfounded. I told David about the birthday dinner, about Jessica's cruel words, about my growing realization that my daughter saw me as nothing more than a burden to be endured and an inheritance to be claimed. What are my options? I asked. David smiled, and there was something almost predatory in it. Mrs. Richardson, you have more options than you can imagine. The question is, what do you want to accomplish? I want Jessica to understand what she's lost. I want her to realize that love and respect can't be bought, but they can be forfeited. I want her to learn the value of treating people with dignity. In other words, David said, you want to educate her? Exactly. David opened his briefcase and pulled out a yellow legal pad. Then let's talk strategy. The beautiful thing about your situation, Ava, is that you have all the power, and they have no idea. Jessica and Brad think they're managing a dependent elderly woman. They have no concept of the resources at your disposal or the influence you wield. He was right. Jessica had spent years treating me like a charity case, offering to help with my finances, suggesting I might need to downsize or move into assisted living. She had no idea that I could buy and sell her comfortable middle-class lifestyle 10 times over. The TechFlow shares are particularly interesting, David continued. As a major shareholder, you have significant influence over company decisions. While you don't have voting control, you certainly have enough shares to make management very, very nervous if you chose to voice concerns about, let's say, employee performance or corporate restructuring needs. Are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything specific yet, but Brad's position at the company is far more precarious than he realizes. Senior managers are expensive, and in today's economy, companies are always looking for ways to streamline operations. A word from a major shareholder about the need for fresh blood or new perspectives can be very influential. I thought about Brad's arrogance, his constant bragging about his importance to the company, his condescending attitude toward everyone he considered beneath him. The irony was delicious. His job security depended on the approval of the woman he treated like a doddering old fool. What else? Well, David said, consulting his notes, I've been managing the monthly transfers to Jessica's account for years, $3,200 every month, plus additional amounts for what Robert called emergency assistance. Over the past 5 years, that's totaled approximately $247,000. I stared at him. What monthly transfers? The support payments your husband set up. Jessica's been receiving them since 2019 when Brad's previous company downsized and he was out of work for several months. Robert wanted to help without making them feel like charity cases, so he structured it as an early inheritance distribution. Jessica thinks it comes from a trust fund that pays out automatically. My heart started pounding. Jessica had been receiving nearly $250,000 from me over the past 5 years, and she had never once acknowledged it. Never a thank you, never recognition that her comfortable lifestyle was being subsidized by her supposedly impoverished mother. While she was complaining about my birthday dinner costing too much, she was living off money that came directly from my accounts. There's also the BMW, David continued. The lease payments come from your account, $847 per month for the past 3 years, and the homeowner's insurance on their house, which Robert insisted on paying as a gift when they bought the place. That's another $340 monthly. I did the math quickly in my head. Jessica and Brad were receiving over $4,400 every month from me, plus irregular emergency payments, and they had convinced themselves and tried to convince me that I was the one in financial distress. Can we stop all of this? Immediately? Of course. You're the account holder. These transfers only continue at your discretion, and they'll think it's some kind of technical problem with the trust fund? David smiled. Initially, yes. But when they investigate, they'll discover the truth. That there never was an automatic trust fund, that every penny has been coming from your personal account, and that the money has stopped because you chose to stop it. I felt a surge of power, unlike anything I'd experienced since Robert's death. For 5 years, I had been grieving, diminished, allowing myself to be treated as a burden. But I wasn't a burden. I wasn't dependent. I wasn't weak. I was rich, and I was furious, and I was about to become very, very dangerous. David, I said, I think it's time to begin my daughter's education. The next morning, I woke up feeling like a different person. For the first time since Robert's death, I had a sense of purpose that extended beyond just getting through each day. I made myself a proper breakfast, something I'd been neglecting lately, and sat down with David Thompson's business card and a notepad to plan what he had so aptly called my daughter's education. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was working with. I called David early and asked him to meet me at his office downtown. His law firm occupied the top 2 floors of a historic building on Broad Street, with views of Charleston Harbor that probably cost more per month than most people's mortgages. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, I told him as we sat in his mahogany-paneled office. I want to be strategic about this, not vindictive. There's a difference. David nodded approvingly. Robert always said you had the best instincts of anyone he knew. What are you thinking? Jessica needs to learn several lessons. First, that treating people with cruelty has consequences. Second, that the money she's been taking for granted isn't hers by right. And third, that respect is earned, not inherited. Those are excellent objectives. How do you want to structure this? I had been thinking about this all night. I want it to be gradual. If everything happens at once, she might just write it off as bad luck or economic circumstances. I want her to slowly realize that her actions have directly caused her problems. David pulled out a fresh legal pad. Walk me through your thinking. Phase 1. Financial reality. Cut off all the hidden support immediately, but don't explain why. Let them scramble to figure out what happened to money they never acknowledged receiving in the first place. That's elegant, David said, making notes. They'll be forced to investigate, which will reveal how much they've been depending on your generosity. Phase 2. Professional consequences. I want to use my position as a TechFlow shareholder to create problems for Brad at work. Not enough to ruin his career permanently, but enough to make him understand that his job security isn't as solid as he thinks. I can arrange for you to have a conversation with the CEO, Marcus Webb. He's a smart man who values his major shareholders' opinions highly. Phase 3. Social pressure. I want to withdraw from the family activities where I've been providing free labor and financial support. Let them handle their own entertaining, their own childcare, their own emergencies. David was nodding as he wrote, and Phase 4. Revelation. When they're sufficiently desperate, when they've been forced to confront how much their lifestyle depended on my support, then I reveal the full truth about our financial situation, but not to rescue them. To make them understand what they've lost through their own cruelty. It's a good plan, David said. But we need to be careful about the TechFlow situation. As a major shareholder, you have fiduciary duties. We can't manipulate the stock or make decisions that harm the company just for personal revenge. I understand. But if Brad truly isn't performing well in his position, then addressing that would actually be good for the company, wouldn't it? David smiled. Now you're thinking like a businesswoman. Why don't I do some research into Brad's actual performance? If there are legitimate concerns about his work, then your intervention would be entirely appropriate. Over the next week, I began implementing Phase 1 while David gathered intelligence. The financial cutoff was surprisingly easy. Just a few phone calls to redirect automatic payments and cancel standing transfers. Within 3 days, I had eliminated over $4,400 in monthly support that Jessica and Brad had been receiving. I also made some other strategic changes. I canceled the family plan that was paying for Emma's expensive iPhone and unlimited data. I stopped the monthly payments to the lawn service that maintained their property. I redirected the payments for Jessica's gym membership and Brad's country club dues. None of these were large amounts individually, but together they represented another $800 monthly in lifestyle support. The beauty of it was that each service would be canceled individually, with different timing. It would look like a series of unrelated technical problems rather than a coordinated withdrawal of support. Meanwhile, I began reaching out to old friends I had neglected during my years of grief. Robert and I had once been quite social, but after his death, I had withdrawn from most of our circle. Now I started accepting invitations, hosting small dinner parties, reconnecting with the community that had always been there. It was remarkable how differently people treated me when I presented myself with confidence instead of as a grieving widow. Margaret Ashford, whose husband had been Robert's business partner, invited me to join her book club. Susan Patterson, who chaired several charity boards, asked if I'd be interested in joining the committee for the Historic Preservation Society's annual gala. Ava, it's so wonderful to see you looking like yourself again, Susan said over lunch at the Ocean House. Robert wouldn't have wanted you to hide away forever. She was right, of course. Robert had always encouraged me to be independent, to have my own interests and friendships. I had let grief turn me into a shadow of myself, and in that diminished state, I had become vulnerable to Jessica's manipulation. But the most important relationship I rebuilt was with my granddaughter, Emma. I started texting her directly instead of going through Jessica, inviting her for individual activities, shopping trips, museum visits, lunch at her favorite restaurants. Without her parents' influence, Emma was actually a delightful companion, smart and funny and curious about everything. "Grandma," she said during one of our outings, "Mom's been super stressed lately. She keeps getting these weird cancellation notices for stuff, and she's been arguing with Dad about money constantly." "Oh," I said carefully, "that sounds difficult." "Yeah, and Dad's been working like crazy. He says his boss is asking all these questions about his projects and his performance reviews. He's been coming home really late and going in early." I felt a small thrill of satisfaction. David's research had revealed that Brad's performance at TechFlow had indeed been questionable for several months. His team had missed 2 major project deadlines, and there had been complaints about his management style from junior employees. When the CEO, Marcus Webb, had asked for my opinion as a major shareholder about refreshing the leadership team, I had simply said that companies succeed when they have managers who are both competent and collaborative. "Sometimes work gets stressful," I told Emma, "but your parents are smart people. They'll figure it out." Emma nodded, but she looked troubled. "I just wish everyone would stop fighting about money all the time. It's like that's all they talk about anymore." By the end of the second week, Jessica called me. Her voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "Mom, we're having some technical problems with our banking. There seems to be an issue with some automatic payments that we've been receiving. Do you know anything about Dad's old trust accounts?" "What kind of problem, sweetheart?" I asked, though I knew exactly what problems she was talking about. "Money that we've been getting regularly just stopped. The bank says the account it was coming from has been closed or redirected, but we can't figure out which account it was. We thought maybe you might know something about Dad's financial arrangements." "I'm not sure I understand. What money are you talking about?" There was a long pause. "Just some family money. Dad set up some things years ago to help us out during Brad's career transition. We've been getting regular payments, but now they've stopped." She couldn't bring herself to admit how much money she'd been taking, or for how long. She certainly couldn't acknowledge that she had never once thanked me for it. "Have you tried calling the bank directly?" I suggested. "Sometimes these things are just computer errors." "We did. They said the account holder changed the payment instructions." "Well, that's strange. Who was the account holder?" Another pause. Jessica clearly didn't want to answer that question, because it would require her to admit that she didn't actually know where her monthly windfall had been coming from. We're still trying to figure that out," she said finally. "I'm sure you'll sort it out," I said cheerfully. "You and Brad are so good with financial things." After I hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my back porch, watching the sun set over Charleston Harbor. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt genuinely happy. 3 days later, Brad called me directly, something he had never done in the 15 years he'd been married to my daughter. "Ava," he said, and his voice had lost its usual condescending tone. "I wonder if we could talk. There are some financial irregularities we're trying to sort out, and Jessica thought you might have some insight into Robert's estate planning." "Of course, Brad. What seems to be the problem?" "Well, we've been receiving what we thought were automatic distributions from a family trustee, but the payments have stopped. When we investigated, we discovered that the payments were actually coming from a personal account, not a trust fund. The bank won't tell us whose account it was, just that the account holder terminated the transfers." "That does sound confusing," I said. "How much money are we talking about?" About $4,000 a month, plus some other payments for insurance and car leases and things like that." $4,000 a month. He couldn't even be honest about the full amount. "That's quite a lot of money," I said. "I can understand why you'd be concerned about losing it. Have you considered that maybe whoever was sending those payments felt that the arrangement should change?" "What do you mean?" "Well, Brad, if someone was quietly helping your family for years, paying for your car, your insurance, your monthly expenses, and they never received any acknowledgement or gratitude, they might eventually decide that their generosity wasn't being appreciated." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Brad, are you still there?" "Ava," he said slowly, "are you saying that the money was coming from you?" "I'm not saying anything specific, Brad. I'm just suggesting that gratitude is an important part of any relationship, financial or otherwise. When people feel taken for granted, they sometimes reassess their priorities." I could practically hear his mind working. If someone wanted to resume those payments, what would they need to do?" "Oh, I think that would depend on why the payments stopped in the first place. If it was a matter of feeling unappreciated, then perhaps the situation would need to change significantly. What kind of change? Well, respect is a good starting point. Treating people with dignity, valuing their contributions, acknowledging their generosity instead of taking it for granted. Another long pause. Ava, I think Jessica and I may have made some mistakes. Mistakes how, Brad? In how we've treated you, especially at your birthday dinner. Jessica's been upset about it too. We both said some things we shouldn't have said. This was fascinating. Brad was trying to apologize without actually admitting what they had done wrong. He wanted the money back, but he didn't want to acknowledge the cruelty that had caused me to stop it. I appreciate that, Brad. But words have consequences. When someone tells you they hope it's your last birthday, when they call you a financial burden, when they make it clear that they see your death as a financial opportunity, well, that changes how you view the relationship. Jesus, Brad whispered. You heard all of that. I heard all of that. Ava, Jessica's been a wreck since that night. She knows she went too far. We both know we went too far. And what has Jessica said about going too far? She's been talking about calling you. She's been wanting to apologize. But she hasn't called. No, she's been scared, I think. Scared that she really damaged things between you two. She did damage things. Brad, the question is whether that damage can be repaired. What would it take? To repair it, I mean. I smiled. Even though he couldn't see me, that's not really for me to say, Brad. Jessica's a grown woman. If she wants to repair our relationship, she needs to figure out how to do that herself. But I can tell you this. It would need to be genuine. It would need to acknowledge the full scope of what she's done. And it would need to include some understanding of what she's actually lost. What do you mean? What she's lost? Well, Brad, I think you and Jessica have operated under some mistaken assumptions about my financial situation. Perhaps it's time for those assumptions to be corrected. That evening, David called to update me on the tech flow situation. Marcus Webb called me today, he said. He wanted to thank you for your insights about management effectiveness. It seems they've decided to restructure Brad's department. He won't be losing his job, but he's being moved to a different role with significantly different responsibilities. Different how? Instead of managing a team, he'll be working as an individual contributor on special projects. It's technically a lateral move, but it comes with about a $35,000 reduction in salary and the loss of his company car. I felt a moment of guilt, quickly followed by satisfaction. Brad's arrogance had consequences, and those consequences had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with his actual performance. How did he take the news? According to Marcus, not well. But the decision is final. The company needs results, and Brad hasn't been delivering them. Now Jessica and Brad were facing a reduction in income of about $35,000 per year, plus the loss of the company car, plus the elimination of over $4,400 monthly in support they hadn't realized they were getting from me. Their comfortable lifestyle was about to become much less comfortable, and they were going to have to confront the reality that their security had been built on foundations they didn't even know existed. Phase 1 was complete. It was time to move to Phase 2, letting them discover just how much their world depended on my generosity and just how much power I actually held. The education of Jessica and Brad Richardson was about to begin in earnest. The third week of my educational program began with a phone call that I'd been expecting. Jessica's voice was shaky, and I could hear Emma crying in the background. Mom, we need to talk. Something's wrong with Emma's phone, and the insurance company says our homeowner's policy has lapsed, and Brad's car lease company is demanding immediate payment for 3 months of overdue payments. I don't understand what's happening. Oh my, I said, settling into Robert's favorite chair with my morning coffee. That does sound stressful. Have you tried calling the companies directly to sort it out? I've been on the phone for 2 days. Everyone says the same thing, that payments haven't been received and they need immediate payment to restore service. But Mom, we never made these payments ourselves. They were automatic, through some kind of family account system Dad set up. What kind of family account system? I don't know exactly. Dad handled all of that before he died, and then it just kept working automatically. We assumed it was part of his estate planning. I almost smiled. Jessica was finally being forced to confront how little she actually knew about the financial arrangements that had been supporting her lifestyle. Well, yeah, sweetheart, maybe the account ran out of money. Trust funds don't last forever, especially if people don't monitor them properly. But we checked with our bank, and they said the payments were coming from an outside account. When we tried to trace it, they said we'd need authorization from the account holder to get information. That seems reasonable. Did you try to contact the account holder? That's the problem. We don't know who it is. The bank says it's a privacy issue. I let the silence stretch for a moment. Jessica, how much money are we talking about? Total. Maybe I can help you figure out what happened. It's a lot, Mom. About $5,000 a month? Total. For everything. Even now, she was lying about the full amount. The total had been closer to $5,500, and that didn't include the irregular emergency payments that had probably added another $15,000 per year. $5,000 a month? I let my voice sound shocked. Jessica, that's $60,000 a year. Where did you think this money was coming from? Dad said, before he died, he said there were accounts set up to help us during transitions. He said it was family money that was supposed to support the next generation, and you never thought to verify this. Never tried to understand where such a large amount of money was coming from. No, it was just there, every month. So we assumed it was legitimate. Dad wouldn't have lied about something like that. She was right. Robert wouldn't have lied, but he also wouldn't have set up any automatic payments without making sure I understood and approved of them. Jessica had made assumptions based on wishful thinking, not reality. Well, I said, I suppose you'll need to figure out how to manage without this money while you sort out what happened. Have you and Brad looked at your budget? Mom, you don't understand. We can't just absorb $5,000 a month. Our mortgage payment is $4,800. Emma's private school is $2,000 a month. Brad's car payment was $400 and now they want $1,200 immediately or they'll repossess it. For the first time in this conversation, I felt a genuine stab of concern. Not for Jessica and Brad, but for Emma. She was 16, and it wasn't her fault that her parents had built their lifestyle around money they didn't understand. What about Brad's job? I asked. Surely his salary at TechFlow can cover your basic expenses. That's another problem. They restructured his department last week. He's keeping his job, but they cut his salary by $35,000 and took away his company car. Mom, it's like everything is falling apart at once. I could hear the genuine panic in her voice now. In the space of 3 weeks, Jessica and Brad had lost over $90,000 in annual income and support. They were about to discover what most American families already knew. That middle-class comfort was fragile and expensive to maintain. I'm sorry to hear you're having such difficulties, I said. But Jessica, you and Brad are smart, capable people. You'll figure out how to adjust. Adjust, Mom? We might lose the house. Emma might have to change schools. Brad's talking about us moving to a smaller place, maybe even renting instead of owning. Well, lots of people rent, sweetheart, and public schools in Charleston aren't bad at all. Emma's a bright girl. She'll adapt. There was a long silence. Mom, I need to ask you something directly. Of course. Was the money coming from you? I had been waiting for this question for 3 weeks. What makes you think it might be? Brad said you made some comments about gratitude and appreciation when he called you. And the timing, everything stopped right after my birthday dinner. Jessica, what happened at your birthday dinner? Another silence. I said some things I shouldn't have said. What things? I was frustrated about money. And I said some horrible things about you getting older, about being a burden. I was wrong. Mom, I was completely wrong. What specifically did you say, Jessica? She was crying now. I said I hoped it was your last birthday. I said you'd lived long enough. I called you a financial burden. And the worst part is, if you were the one sending us that money, then I was calling you a burden while you were supporting our entire lifestyle. Finally, the truth. Yes, I said simply. I was supporting your entire lifestyle. Oh God, Mom, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. You had no idea because you never asked. In 5 years, Jessica, you never once thanked me for any of it. You never acknowledged the car payments, the insurance, the monthly support, the emergency money. You took all of it for granted while simultaneously treating me like I was a charity case who needed your financial advice. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know it was coming from you, but you knew it was coming from somewhere. Jessica, $60,000 a year doesn't just appear magically. You chose not to investigate because it was convenient not to know. She was sobbing now. What can I do? How can I fix this? I don't know that you can fix it, sweetheart. Trust once broken is very hard to repair. Please, please, Mom, there has to be something. We'll lose everything. Jessica, let me ask you something. When you wished for my death at my birthday dinner, what did you think would happen to your financial situation? I don't understand. You called me a financial burden. You suggested I should accept the reality of aging. You implied that I was costing you money, but the reality is that I was subsidizing your life to the tune of almost $90,000 a year. So when you wished for my death, what did you think would happen to that support? The silence stretched so long I thought she might have hung up. I never thought about it, she whispered finally. Exactly. You never thought about it. You never thought about where your security came from. You never thought about who was making your comfortable life possible. And you never thought about the consequences of treating that person with cruelty and disrespect. Mom, please. I'll do anything. I'll apologize publicly. I'll tell everyone how wrong I was. Jessica, I interrupted gently. I need you to understand something. This isn't about punishment. This is about education. You've spent the last 5 years treating me like I was dependent on your charity, while you were actually dependent on mine. You need to learn what it feels like to be genuinely vulnerable, genuinely in need, before you can understand how cruel your words were. So you're not going to help us. I didn't say that. But Jessica, any help would need to come with conditions, and those conditions would need to ensure that this education is complete. What kind of conditions? I had been thinking about this conversation for weeks, planning exactly what I would say. First, you would need to make a complete accounting of every dollar you've received from me over the past 5 years. Research it, track it down, add it up, and present me with a detailed report. I want you to understand exactly how much your lifestyle has depended on my generosity. Okay. Yes, I can do that. Second, you would need to publicly acknowledge your mistake. I want a written apology, published in the Charleston Post and Courier, acknowledging that you mistreated your mother and took her financial support for granted. You want me to put an apology in the newspaper? I want you to experience the public accountability that comes with public cruelty, Jessica. Words have consequences. Mom, that's humiliating. Not nearly as humiliating as having your daughter wish for your death at your own birthday party. She was quiet for a long moment. What else? Third, I want you and Brad to attend financial counseling, not just budgeting advice. I want you to work with a counselor who can help you understand the psychology of financial dependence and entitlement. Okay. Fourth, I want you to volunteer 20 hours a month minimum at a nonprofit that serves elderly people. I want you to spend time with people your age who actually are struggling financially, who actually are vulnerable, who actually need support. I want you to understand the difference between genuine need and manufactured crisis. I can do that. And fifth, Emma needs to understand what happened here. Not the details of the money, but the principles. She needs to learn that treating people with respect isn't optional, even when those people are family members. Even when they're older, even when they seem vulnerable. I'll talk to her. No, Jessica, we'll talk to her, together. I want to make sure she gets the right message. There was another long pause. If I do all of these things, will you consider resuming the financial support? I'll consider it. But Jessica, even if I decide to help your family again, it will never be the same as it was. You'll know where every dollar comes from. You'll be accountable for how it's used. And if you ever treat me with disrespect again, it will stop permanently. I understand. Do you? Because this isn't just about money, Jessica. This is about whether you're capable of learning from your mistakes, whether you can develop genuine gratitude instead of just performing it to get what you want. I am grateful by it, Mom. I'm so grateful I can't even express it. Then show me. Not with words, but with actions. Complete the conditions I've outlined, and then we'll talk about the future. After I hung up, I sat quietly for a few minutes, The conversation had been more emotional than I'd expected, but also more satisfying. For the first time in 5 years, Jessica had been forced to confront the reality of our relationship, that she needed me far more than I needed her. But the real test would be whether she could complete the tasks I'd given her, and whether she could do so with genuine understanding rather than just going through the motions. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched Jessica's progress with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. She threw herself into the accounting project with an intensity that surprised me. She called banks, researched old statements, and slowly built a comprehensive picture of just how much financial support she'd been receiving. The final report she presented to me was 23 pages long, meticulously detailed and devastating in its implications. Over 5 years, I had provided $347,000 in direct support to her family: car payments, insurance, monthly transfers, emergency assistance, private school tuition supplements, vacation funding. The list went on and on. "I had no idea," she said, handing me the bound report. "I knew we were getting some help, but I never imagined it was this much." "What did you think your lifestyle cost, Jessica?" "I thought we were living within Brad's salary. I thought the extra money was maybe $10,000 or $15,000 a year, just helping with emergencies. Your family has been living $40,000 to $50,000 above Brad's income for 5 years. You've been essentially upper-middle-class people living on a middle-class salary, with the difference made up by your supposedly impoverished mother." She stared at the numbers in the report. "I feel sick." "You should feel sick. But more importantly, you should feel educated." The public apology was harder for her. She drafted it 7 times before producing something I considered acceptable. The final version, which ran in the Post and Courier's Sunday Opinions section, was titled, "What I Learned About Gratitude Too Late." It reads in part, "I'm writing to publicly acknowledge a terrible mistake I made, and to offer a lesson that I hope other families can learn from my failure. 3 weeks ago, at my mother's 65th birthday dinner, I told her that I hoped it was her last birthday, that she had lived long enough, and that she needed to accept the reality of being a financial burden on her family." These words were not only cruel, they were also based on a complete misunderstanding of our family's financial situation. The truth, which I have only recently learned, is that my mother has been quietly supporting my family's lifestyle for 5 years, to the tune of nearly $350,000. While I was calling her a burden, she was paying for our car, our insurance, our children's education, and providing monthly support that made our comfortable middle-class life possible. I have no excuse for my cruelty, my ingratitude, or my ignorance, but I hope that by sharing this story, other families might avoid making the same mistakes I made. Respect your elders, appreciate their contributions, and never assume that independence means you don't owe gratitude to those who have helped make your success possible. The response to the apology was immediate and overwhelming. I received dozens of phone calls and letters from friends and acquaintances, expressing shock at Jessica's original behavior and admiration for my handling of the situation. Several people mentioned that they had their own stories of ungrateful adult children and asked for advice on how to set appropriate boundaries. But the most meaningful response came from Emma. She appeared at my front door on the Tuesday after the apology was published, still wearing her school uniform, with tears streaming down her face. "Grandma," she said, "I read Mom's letter in the paper. I had no idea you'd been helping us so much, and I had no idea Mom said those awful things to you." I invited her in and made her hot chocolate while she told me how she was feeling. "I'm so ashamed," she said, "not just of what Mom said, but of how I've been acting too. I've been taking everything for granted. My phone, my school, my clothes, our house. I never thought about where any of it came from. Emma, you're 16. You're not supposed to be responsible for understanding your family's finances, but I am supposed to be grateful, and I am supposed to treat you with respect. And I haven't been doing either of those things." We talked for 2 hours. Emma was mature enough to understand the principles at stake, and young enough to genuinely change her behavior going forward. By the time she left, I felt more hopeful about our family's future than I had in years. Jessica's volunteer work proved to be another revelation for her. She chose to work at Magnolia Manor, an assisted living facility in West Ashley, that served residents with limited financial resources. Her job was to help with activities, assist during meals, and provide companionship to elderly people who rarely had visitors. "Mom," she told me, after her 3rd week there, "I met a woman yesterday who reminded me of you. Her name is Dorothy, and she's 78. Her son moved to California and only calls her on holidays. She has to choose between her heart medication and her groceries some months. When I told her about what I'd said to you, she just looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language." "What did she say?" "She said, 'Honey, if I had a daughter who loved me enough to support my family for 5 years, I'd thank God every single day for the blessing. It made me realize that I haven't just been taking your money for granted. I've been taking your love for granted." The financial counseling sessions were harder for both Jessica and Brad. Their counselor, Dr. Sarah Chen, specialized in helping families understand the psychological dynamics of money and dependence. She made them confront some uncomfortable truths about their sense of entitlement and their assumptions about financial security. "One of the things Dr. Chen helped me understand," Jessica told me, "is that I'd created a fantasy where Dad had somehow arranged for us to be taken care of forever. I used that fantasy to avoid taking responsibility for our financial decisions." "And what about Brad?" "He's struggling more than I am. His whole identity was tied up in being successful and independent. Learning that we've been dependent on your charity for years has been really hard for his ego. Is he willing to continue with the counseling? He has to be. We both realize that this isn't just about money. It's about how we think about family relationships and responsibility." 6 weeks after our initial conversation, Jessica completed all 5 conditions. She had produced the financial accounting, published the public apology, attended 8 counseling sessions, volunteered 60 hours at Magnolia Manor, and had a serious conversation with Emma about respect and gratitude. More importantly, she seemed to have genuinely internalized the lessons I'd been trying to teach her. "I understand now that what you did wasn't just about teaching me a lesson," she said, as we sat on my back porch, watching the sun set over the harbor. "You gave me something I needed, the experience of being genuinely vulnerable, of not knowing where security was going to come from." "And how did that feel?" "Terrifying, and humbling, and educational. Exactly like you said it would be." I reached over and took her hand. "Jessica, I want you to know that I'm proud of how you've handled these past 2 months. It would have been easier to just be angry and resentful. Instead, you chose to learn. So what happens now?" I had been thinking about this question for weeks. "Now we build a new relationship, one based on mutual respect, genuine gratitude, and complete honesty about our financial arrangements. Are you willing to help us again?" "I'm willing to help Emma," I said carefully. "Her education, her future, that's non-negotiable. But for you and Brad, help will come with structure and accountability." I pulled out a folder I had prepared. "I've been working with David Thompson to create a family financial plan. If you and Brad are interested, we can set up a system where I provide some ongoing support, but with complete transparency about amounts, purposes, and expectations." Jessica opened the folder and read through the proposal. Instead of automatic monthly payments, there would be specific, defined assistance, partial help with Emma's education costs, emergency support for genuine crises, and matching funds for retirement savings if Jessica and Brad met certain financial responsibility benchmarks. "This is much more structured than what we had before," she said. "Exactly. You'll know exactly where every dollar comes from and what it's for. You'll be accountable for how it's used. And it will decrease over time as your own financial situation improves. What if we slip back into old patterns? Then the support stops permanently, and you'll need to figure out how to manage on your own." Jessica nodded slowly. "That's fair. More than fair. But Jessica, there's one more thing. This arrangement only works if our relationship is genuinely healthy. If you treat me with disrespect, if you take my generosity for granted, if you ever again suggest that I'm a burden, or that my death would be convenient for you, then everything stops immediately and permanently." "I would never." "You would never again," I corrected. "You did it once. You're capable of it. We both need to remember that." She was quiet for a moment. "How do I make sure I never forget this lesson?" "By staying grateful, Jessica. By remembering what it felt like to be genuinely vulnerable. by treating every day of security as a gift rather than a right. That evening, as I prepared dinner for the first time in months with the knowledge that I would soon have family joining me again, I thought about Robert's letter and his hope that this day would never come. In one sense, he had been wrong. The day had come when I needed to use the power he had given me. But in another sense, he had been exactly right. I had needed my strength. I had found it in his careful planning, and I had used it not for revenge, but for education. Jessica and Brad had learned what they needed to learn, and our family was stronger for it. The woman who had sat alone in her house 6 weeks ago, believing herself to be a burden, was gone. In her place was someone who understood her own worth, her own power, and her own capacity for both justice and mercy. The education was complete. Now we could begin the work of rebuilding our family on a foundation of truth, respect, and genuine gratitude. 2 months after Jessica completed her education, I thought we had reached a new equilibrium. The structured support system was working. Jessica was consistently volunteering at Magnolia Manor, and our family dinners had become pleasant affairs built on honesty rather than hidden resentment. But I should have known that the real test would come when the lessons became inconvenient. The crisis began on a rainy Thursday in November. Jessica called me, and I could immediately hear the old desperation creeping back into her voice. "Mom, we have a problem. Brad's been offered a position with a startup in Austin. It's a huge opportunity. They want to make him VP of operations, with a salary that's almost double what he's making now." "That sounds wonderful," I said, though I sensed there was more coming. "The thing is, they need him to start in 6 weeks. And Mom, we'd have to move to Texas. Emma would have to finish her senior year at a new school. We'd have to sell the house quickly. And," she paused, "we'd need help with the transition costs." Here it was. The moment when all the lessons learned would either stick or crumble under pressure. "What kind of help, Jessica?" "Moving expenses, maybe help with a down payment on a house in Austin, and probably some assistance with Emma's tuition if she can't get in-state residency immediately." I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach. "How much are we talking about?" Maybe $150,000. Brad says it's an investment in our future, and we'd pay you back once he's established in the new position." The old Ava might have simply said no. The broken Ava from 6 months ago might have said yes out of guilt and obligation. But the Ava who had learned her own strength had a different response. "Jessica, I'd like you and Brad to come over this evening. We need to have a conversation about this face-to-face." They arrived at 7 o'clock, and I could see the anxiety written all over both their faces. We sat in my living room, the same room where David Thompson had first explained my real financial situation to me. "Tell me about this opportunity," I said. Brad launched into an enthusiastic description of the startup, their innovative approach to supply chain management, the potential for growth, the equity position he'd been offered. He spoke for 10 minutes about the career opportunity without once mentioning the impact on Emma or the family. "And what about Emma's perspective on this?" I asked when he finished. Jessica and Brad exchanged glances. "We haven't told her yet," Jessica admitted. "We wanted to make sure it was financially feasible first. So you're asking me to fund a major life change that will disrupt your daughter's senior year of high school, and you haven't even discussed it with her?" "Mom, she's 17. She doesn't get a vote in Brad's career decisions." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Jessica, do you remember what you learned these past few months about making assumptions about other people's lives? This is different. Is it? You're asking me to subsidize a decision that affects Emma's education, her friendships, her college applications, her entire senior year experience. And you haven't even asked her what she thinks." Brad leaned forward. "Ava, with respect, parenting decisions are really between Jessica and me. With respect, Brad, decisions that require my financial support are very much my business." The room went quiet. I could see Jessica's jaw tightening, and I recognized the look. It was the same expression she'd worn at my birthday dinner, the same barely controlled resentment that had led to her cruel words. "Mom," she said carefully, "are you saying you won't help us?" "I'm saying I won't help you make a decision that you're unwilling to discuss openly with everyone it affects." "This is ridiculous," Brad said, his voice rising. "We're talking about my career, our family's future. Emma will adapt. Kids are resilient. Emma is 17 years old. 6 months away from graduating from the school she's attended since kindergarten. She has friends, activities, college applications pending with Charleston connections. But you haven't even asked her how she feels about leaving all of that behind. Because it doesn't matter how she feels, Jessica snapped. Sometimes parents have to make hard decisions, and kids have to deal with it. And there it was, the moment when Jessica's education would either hold or shatter completely. Jessica, I said quietly, listen to what you just said. What? You just told me that Emma's feelings don't matter because you know what's best for her. You're making a major decision that affects her life without consulting her. And you're asking me to fund it. Mom, that's not the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. For 5 years, you made assumptions about my life, my finances, my needs, without ever asking me what I thought or how I felt. You decided what was best for me. Selling my house, moving to assisted living, accepting the reality of aging, without ever consulting me. And now you're doing exactly the same thing to Emma. The parallel hit Jessica like a slap. I could see the recognition dawning in her eyes. Furthermore, I continued, you're asking me to enable this behavior by providing the financial support that makes it possible. So you're saying no. Brad's voice was tight with anger. I'm saying that if you want my financial support for this move, Emma gets a full voice in the decision. You sit down with her, you explain the opportunity, you listen to her concerns, you explore alternatives together, and you give her genuine input into whether and how this happens. And if she says she doesn't want to move, then you factor that into your decision-making process, like any responsible parent would. Jessica stood up abruptly. This is insane. You're giving a 17-year-old veto power over Brad's career. I'm requiring you to treat your daughter with the same respect and consideration that you should have been showing me all along. Mom, I've apologized for what happened before. I've done everything you asked. I thought we were past this. I stood up too and looked directly into my daughter's eyes. Jessica, we're only past it if you've actually learned from it. Right now, it looks like you learned how to perform gratitude and respect when you need something, but you haven't learned how to actually practice them consistently. That's not fair. What's not fair is asking a 17-year-old to uproot her entire life for your career ambitions without even consulting her. What's not fair is asking me to fund decisions I disagree with. What's not fair is reverting to the same pattern of assumptions and entitlement that got us into trouble in the first place. Brad stood up and grabbed his coat. This is bullshit, Ava. We don't need this. You're right, Brad. You don't need this. You can make whatever decision you want about your career, but you can't make it with my money unless you're willing to make it with my values. Jessica looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her struggling with herself. Part of her wanted to storm out with Brad, to revert to the angry entitlement that had defined our relationship for so many years. But part of her recognized the truth of what I was saying. What exactly are you asking us to do? She said finally. Talk to Emma. Tonight. Tell her about the opportunity. Ask her how she feels. Listen to her concerns. Find out what would make this transition easier for her if you do decide to move. Treat her like a person whose feelings matter, not like a piece of luggage you can move around at will. And then we'll talk about what kind of support I might be willing to provide, based on what Emma needs, not just what you want. Jessica looked at Brad, who was fuming by the door. We'll talk to her, she said quietly. Good, but Mom, I want you to know that I think you're being unreasonable. I smiled sadly. Jessica, 6 months ago, you would have said I was being unreasonable if I asked you to thank me for supporting your family. The fact that you still think respect and consideration are unreasonable requirements tells me that you haven't learned as much as I'd hoped. They left without saying goodbye, and I sat alone in my living room, wondering if I had just destroyed the fragile peace we'd built over the past few months. But as I thought about Emma, brilliant, funny Emma, who deserved to have her voice heard in decisions that would shape her senior year, I knew I had made the right choice. The education wasn't complete after all. It had just entered its most crucial phase. 3 days passed in silence after Jessica and Brad left my house. I spent those days wondering if I had pushed too hard, if my insistence on Emma having a voice in the decision had finally broken the fragile relationship Jessica and I had rebuilt. But on Sunday evening, my doorbell rang. Emma stood on my front porch, tears streaming down her face, holding an overnight bag. "Grandma," she said, "can I stay here tonight? I need to talk to someone who actually listens to me." I pulled her inside immediately, made her hot chocolate, and settled her into the guest room that had been hers whenever she'd spent weekends with Robert and me during her childhood. "They told you about Austin," I said. It wasn't a question. "They told me we're moving to Austin. They didn't ask me anything. They just informed me that Dad got a job and we're leaving in 6 weeks." She wiped her eyes with the tissue I handed her. "Grandma, I've been planning my senior year for 3 years. I'm student body treasurer. I'm in the spring play. My best friend Chloe and I were going to apply to College of Charleston together. And they just expect me to throw all of that away because Dad got a better job offer." "What did you tell them?" "I told them I didn't want to go. I asked if I could stay here with you and finish senior year and maybe join them in Austin for college." And you know what Mom said? I could guess. But I waited for Emma to tell me. She said I was being selfish and dramatic. She said family comes first, and that means I go where the family goes. She said you probably put me up to asking to stay here. I felt anger rising in my chest, but I kept my voice calm. "What do you think about that?" "I think Mom still doesn't get it. She learned how to apologize for treating you badly, but she didn't learn how to stop treating people badly." My 17-year-old granddaughter had just articulated what I'd been struggling to understand for months. "Emma, what do you want to happen? Honestly, I want to finish senior year here. I want to graduate with my friends, do the spring play, have prom with my boyfriend. I want to start college knowing I completed something I started instead of feeling like I got yanked away from everything that mattered to me. And after graduation, then I'd be happy to move to Austin for college, if that's where they are. Or maybe I'll go to College of Charleston like I planned, and visit them in Austin. But Grandma, I don't want to spend the rest of my life being moved around like a chess piece every time Dad gets a job offer." I looked at this young woman who had somehow managed to articulate her needs and boundaries more clearly than her parents ever had, and I made a decision that I knew would change our family forever. "Emma, would you like me to talk to your parents? Would you? I feel like they might actually listen to you." The next morning, I called Jessica and asked her and Brad to come over for a family meeting. When they arrived, they found Emma and me sitting together at my dining room table with a proposal we had spent hours preparing. "Here's what Emma and I worked out," I said without preamble. "Emma will live with me for the remainder of her senior year. I'll cover any additional expenses for her activities, prom, graduation, and college application processes. You can move to Austin and get established in your new life. After graduation, Emma can choose whether to join you in Austin for college or pursue her original plan to attend College of Charleston." "Absolutely not," Jessica said immediately. "Why not?" Emma asked. "It solves everyone's problems. You get to take Dad's job without worrying about disrupting my senior year, and I get to finish high school where I started, because families stay together," Brad said, "because we're not abandoning our daughter just because it's convenient." "You're not abandoning me," Emma said. "You're respecting my needs instead of ignoring them." I watched Jessica's face as Emma spoke, and I could see the internal struggle playing out. Part of her wanted to stick to her position, to insist on her parental authority, but part of her recognized the echo of our own conflict in this situation. "Jessica," I said quietly, "this is your chance to show Emma that you learned something from our experience. This is your chance to demonstrate that you can put someone else's needs ahead of your own convenience." "It's not about convenience. It's about respect," Emma interrupted. "It's about whether you see me as a person with valid feelings and needs, or as something you own and can move around at will." The silence stretched for several minutes. Finally, Jessica looked at her daughter with tears in her eyes. "When did you become so wise?" "I learned from watching Grandma stand up for herself," Emma said simply. Jessica turned to me. "If we do this, what kind of support would you provide for the move?" "I'd help with transition costs, but not the full amount you originally asked for. You'd need to make this work mostly on your own resources, but I'd ensure Emma has everything she needs for a successful senior year. And if Emma decides to stay in Charleston for college, then I'd support that decision too." Jessica looked at Brad, then back at Emma. "I need some time to think about this." "How much time?" Emma asked. "Give me a week." That evening, after Jessica and Brad had left, Emma and I sat on the back porch watching the sunset over Charleston Harbor. Grandma, do you think they'll agree? I think your mother is finally learning that love sometimes means letting go instead of holding on. A week later, Jessica called with her decision. They would accept our proposal. Emma would stay with me for senior year, and they would move to Austin with the understanding that this was Emma's choice, not a rejection of the family. I want you to know, Jessica said, that this is the hardest decision I've ever made, but I also think it's the first time I've made a decision based on what someone else needed instead of what I wanted. I'm proud of you, I told her, and I meant it. The next few months were among the happiest of my life since Robert's death. Emma and I developed a routine that honored both her need for independence and our mutual affection. She handled her own schedule and responsibilities, while I provided guidance and support when she asked for it. I attended her school plays and tennis matches. She helped me with dinner parties and introduced me to her friends, who seemed genuinely to enjoy spending time at our house. Most importantly, Emma thrived. Her grades improved, her confidence grew, and she began talking about her future with excitement instead of resentment. When graduation day arrived, Jessica and Brad flew in from Austin. The four of us sat together at the ceremony, watching Emma walk across the stage to receive her diploma. Afterward, at the graduation party I hosted at the house, Jessica pulled me aside. Mom, I owe you an apology that goes beyond anything I've said before. Oh? I spent so many years thinking that being a good parent meant controlling everything, making all the decisions, never showing uncertainty. But watching Emma these past few months, seeing how confident and capable she's become when she's treated with respect, I realize I've been doing it all wrong. You're still learning, Jessica. We all are. I'm also learning that you weren't just teaching me about gratitude and respect. You were teaching me about love, real love. That puts the other person's needs first. That fall, Emma started at College of Charleston, living in the dorms but coming home for Sunday dinners. Jessica and Brad settled into their new life in Austin, with Jessica taking a position with a nonprofit that served elderly clients, work she found meaningful in ways that surprised her. Our relationships became more honest, more respectful, and paradoxically, much closer. A year later, as I sat in my garden reading a letter from Emma about her successful freshman year, I thought about Robert's final gift to me. He hadn't just left me money. He had left me the power to teach the people I loved about dignity, respect, and the true meaning of family. The woman who had once accepted cruelty as the price of maintaining relationships was gone. In her place was someone who understood that real love sometimes requires difficult lessons, that genuine respect must be earned and maintained, and that the greatest gift you can give someone is the opportunity to become their best self. My family had learned, finally, that love without respect is just manipulation, that gratitude without acknowledgement is just entitlement, and that the strongest relationships are built on truth, not convenience. At 65, I had discovered that it's never too late to teach people how to love you properly. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is refusing to accept anything less